Mochi Health is here to help you start your weight loss journey with caring, personalized support. Meet one-on-one with board-certified obesity doctors and registered dietitians who truly listen and understand your unique needs. Eligible patients can access affordable GLP-1 medications delivered right to their door each month. No insurance? No problem. Mochi Health accepts FSA and HSA, making care accessible and affordable. And with 24/7 customer service, you'll never feel alone on your path to better health. Get started with Mochi Health today. Take the free quiz at joinmochi.com and use code AUDIO40 at checkout for $40 off your first month of membership. That's joinmochi.com with promo code AUDIO40.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 217 of the True Crime All the Time Unsolved podcast. I'm Mike Ferguson, and with me, as always, is my partner in true crime, Mike Gibson. Gibby, how are you?
Hey, man, I'm doing good. How about yourself?
Doing great. This is our third episode of the night.
Yeah.
So right now, we have an episode out on TCAT.
We do.
On Benjamin Atkins, serial killer who the FBI says is America's fastest serial killer. That's what they call him.
Right.
He murdered 11 women in a very short amount of time in Detroit. Terrible childhood. Good episode. Make sure you check that out. We also put out last night a brand new Patreon episode on the strange story of Joseph Callinger. Gibbs, this was a man who believed he was on a mission from God to kill every person on the planet.
Every person.
And then himself, and then he would become God.
Yeah. It's a good episode. Check it out.
Yeah, definitely check it out if you're a Patreon. And if you're not, now's a great time to sign up. Speaking of Patreon, Gibbs, let's give some shout outs.
Let's do it.
We had TC Agent Jen.
Hey, what's going on, TC Agent?
Very mysterious.
Yeah.
Spencer Nash.
What's going on, Spencer?
Matt.
What's up, Matt?
Diane Targlia.
What's up, Targlia?
Andrea Benson.
Hey, Andrea.
Nicholas Peterson.
Hey, appreciate that, Nicholas.
Georgia Ellis.
Hey, Georgia.
Kelly Knight.
What's up, Knight?
Charlotte Ballin.
Balan.
Alexander 88.
Hey, 88.
Helena Olmsted.
Hey, Lena.
Crystal Carruthers.
Appreciate that, Crystal.
Chelsea Harper.
Hey, Chelsea.
Valentina Casamento.
Casamento, Mr. Roboto, Mojo.
Lorraine Orr.
Hey, Lorraine.
Melanie Newport.
What's up, Newport?
Catherine Olson.
Hey, Catherine.
Amber.
Hey, appreciate that, Amber.
Carter Leishman.
Hey, Leishman.
GD.
Well, thank you, J-Day.
Carrie Kuhn.
Hi, Carrie.
Lisa Sharrow.
Hey, Lisa.
And last but not least, Sarah Kelly.
What's up, Sarah?
And then if we go back into the vault, Gibbs.
Let's do it.
This week, we selected Elizabeth Sirk.
Hey, appreciate that, Elizabeth.
So we do appreciate the new support, the continued support. We had some great PayPal donations also. We had Kia Vandeveer.
Thank you for that so much, Vandeveer.
Jennifer Benson.
Hey, thank you, Jennifer.
Elizabeth Diaz.
What's up, Diaz?
And Ivy Lee.
It's close to Ivy League, but Ivy. Yeah.
It's close.
Close.
All right, buddy. Are you ready to get into this episode of True Crime All the Time Unsolved?
Man, I am ready.
We are talking about the unsolved murders of the Atlantic City Four. Sometimes this case, Gibbs, is referred to as the Eastbound Strangler because it's thought, and we'll get into it as we go, that this unknown serial killer was responsible. It was on November 20th, 2006. The two women stumbled upon the body of a murdered woman behind a seedy motel in Atlantic City, and they called the police. Investigators would discover that 3 other victims had been dumped in a nearby drainage ditch behind the very same motel. All of the victims had a number of similarities, and all had been killed within 7 weeks of one another. To date, no suspects have been named, and despite the case being labeled open and active, there's really been no movement or progress made in a number of years. So who is responsible for the murders of Kimberly Raffo, Tracy Roberts, Molly Diltz, and Barbara Breider? Did the killer move on to new hunting grounds, or did the killer die in some way? Was he locked up? I think it's likely that somebody out there holds the key to solving this case. You and I talk about this all the time.
We do.
In these unsolved cases that we profile, it's always the hope that either somebody listening to our episode or an episode done by another podcast or a Dateline, we don't care.
Right.
But the hope is somebody listening hears a piece of information, and that piece of information creates a spark, and they begin to think, okay, I heard something. It didn't mean anything to me until right now.
Right.
And, it's that one piece of information that could potentially solve a case.
Yeah, they share that information with the tip line, and who knows what could happen.
Exactly. But let's talk about Atlantic City. Have you ever been to Atlantic City?
I have not been to Atlantic City.
I have not either. When I think of Atlantic City, I think of one of my favorite shows, Boardwalk Empire.
Yeah.
Which was basically set in Atlantic City, old Atlantic City. But I think a lot of people equate Atlantic City with its famous boardwalk that lines the family-friendly beaches and is anchored by hotel casinos up and down Pacific Avenue. I think what a lot of tourists don't realize, though, is that, really just about a block away, as you travel inland, things get a little rougher.
Sure does.
More crime, condemned houses. There's a lot more drug activity, sex workers. Just a few miles away from the boardwalk, on the Black Horse Pike, a major highway running northwest to southeast across the state, sits a no-tell motel, renting rooms back in the 2000s for about $25 a night, called the Golden Key Motel.
$25 a night's pretty cheap.
Yeah, even in the 2000s, that was pretty cheap. Now, I remember traveling as a kid. My dad never really wanted to stay at what you would call the finer establishments.
Yeah.
And so we stayed at a lot of motels that, today, if I rolled up with my kids, they would think, Dad, what are you doing?
They're like, we're not staying here.
No, we're going to get murdered.
Yeah.
We won't stay here. But this is where my dad liked to stay, probably because it was $20 or $25 or whatever it was back then. But, in the 2000s, I think rooms had gone up considerably. So $25 a night, I think that was a steal. The motel and surrounding area are a known vice area. You've got violence. You've got drugs, drug dealers, sex workers, johns. Crime is extremely high. And the Golden Key is one of about a dozen such motels in this area of Atlantic City, officially called Egg Harbor Township. According to NewJersey.com, 2 women were walking in the area behind the Golden Key Motel when they spotted what looked like a body lying behind it. It would turn out to be the body of Kimberly Raffo. The 2 women called police, and police would later find 3 more victims dumped in a drainage ditch close behind the motel. All 4 of these victims were in various states of decomposition. Investigators scoured the area for evidence. But while violence and crime were prevalent in the area, murder was not, especially murder on this scale, at this level. The FBI was invited to assist in the case. 3 dozen investigators from the FBI, Egg Harbor Township Police, and the Atlantic City Police worked on the case full-time for several months.
So we got a little task force going.
Yeah. And you and I just talked about this on TCAT. That's what you want to see. You want to see a number of different agencies come together quickly, be able to work together to help solve a case. That's not what we saw in our TCAT case. What we saw is what we often see, which is jurisdictional issues and kind of turf wars and agencies not wanting to work together because they want to be the ones to solve the case.
Right. Yeah.
So it's kind of good here that we're seeing this. This is what you want to see.
Well, it has to be alarming for them when you have 4 murdered individuals in a short period of time in or nearby a tourist area. I mean, Atlantic City's a tourist area.
Well, it is. And it's the draw, right? It's the draw to Atlantic City. It's also the lifeblood. It's what keeps everything going. It, keeps the businesses afloat. So you don't want anything to make people think twice about going to your tourist destination.
Right.
Kimberly Raffo was found lying behind the Golden Key Motel. The other 3 women were found close by, but Kim was not grouped with them. So, I think police probably theorized Gibbs, perhaps the killer ran out of time and needed to flee, or maybe the killer was interrupted. The other 3 victims, Tracy Roberts, Barbara Breider, and Molly Diltz, were placed at intervals of about 50 to 60 feet from one another in the drainage ditch, which was filled with water and sewage, and most likely washed away evidence that may have been left on the victims. All 4 had been killed within about a 2-month time frame, with Kim Raffo and Tracy Roberts being murdered most recently within about 2 weeks of when they were found. All 4 victims were placed face down with their heads pointed east in the direction of the casinos. All were barefoot, but otherwise clothed, and all were missing personal belongings such as handbags, jewelry, identification, and cell phones. 2 victims, Kim Raffo and Tracy Roberts, were later assigned a cause of death as asphyxiation with a ligature, while the other 2 were too decomposed for a cause of death to be conclusively determined, although it's likely that they also died in a similar manner. The 4 victims were between the ages of 20 and 42, and 3 of the victims were blonde. Due to the odd positioning of their bodies, media coverage dubbed the case as the killings of the Eastbound Strangler. Eastbound because the women's heads were eerily twisted in an easterly direction, and Strangler as the cause of death was suspected to be strangulation. The Guardian newspaper reported that 42-year-old Barbara Breider was working as a sex worker to support her drug habit. Her life began to fall apart slowly. She was forced to give up custody of her daughter 3 years before she was murdered. Barbara spent 2 years studying at Penn State University, but within a year after leaving, she was on the streets of Atlantic City, struggling with poverty and addiction. She disappeared in October of 2006, but it was not reported for several weeks. Barbara was from Ventnor, a town adjacent to Atlantic City. She worked as a cocktail waitress at the Tropicana Casino and helped manage her mother's clothing shop before becoming addicted to prescription painkillers following an injury. And when she could no longer access prescription medications, she turned to heroin, which was readily available on the streets of Atlantic City.
It's just something you hear a lot about anymore.
Yeah. I actually watched a pretty good documentary on the opiate crisis.
Yeah.
And it was kind of eye-opening. I know doctors and everybody, they've really cracked down on prescribing, some of the opiates, the actual prescription opiates, because people get addicted to them. I think the problem is, just like in this case, when you can't get that, then you're turning to drugs on the street.
Yeah. I mean, when I was in the hospital, they put me on some of the type of medication.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was the next day I said, I don't want them anymore because I didn't want to have to depend on it. And they said, you can have them. I'm like, I don't want them. I don't need them.
I get that. And it's good if you're able to do that. I think, some people just have such an addictive personality that they can't do what you just did.
No.
They can't say, okay, I'm done. They crave that feeling and what it does to them. I don't know what the right answer is for this opiate crisis. I really don't. Because on the other hand, you have elderly patients who really are in serious pain.
Yeah, that need it.
And can't get it because of the crackdown. And that's tough. That's hard to understand.
You either need to allow them to be in pain or force them to be in pain, or you're going to force them to, maybe some of them will go out and find street drugs.
Yeah, it's tough, man. It's a tough situation. Barbara was one of 4 siblings who all attended Catholic schools, and she was loved by her family. In the year before her death, Barbara was arrested twice for soliciting a police officer. She had been staying periodically with a boyfriend in her hometown of nearby Ventnor. Molly Diltz was 20 at the time of her murder. She disappeared from her boyfriend's house in Black Lick, Pennsylvania, in early October 2006. There really was no reason for her to leave other than the fact that she had a warrant out for her arrest, and she didn't have a regular source of income.
Well, that warrant out for your arrest is sometimes a reason to get up and go.
Yeah, I mean, I said there's no reason to leave, but other than that, there wasn't. It was said that Molly was an impulsive traveler, often staying at homeless shelters or county-run apartments in Philadelphia before landing in Atlantic City. Her family was surprised and saddened when they learned that she was found dead in a ditch behind a seedy motel. Molly had recently experienced the deaths of her mother and brother, and those losses hit her extremely hard. I think, Gibbs, she was finding it very difficult to cope with those losses.
I think it'd be so rough to go through that, not have your brother, your mother around anymore at that early age. 20 years old. Yeah.
I think you have to factor that in. That's young, right? To lose your mother, and especially a brother. He couldn't have been, that old. So difficult for everyone to cope with those type of losses, but more difficult to cope at the young age of 20? I would say, yeah. Her family last heard from Molly when she called them from a payphone in Atlantic City on October 7th, and she was murdered soon after that. Molly was a close friend of victim Kim Raffo. 23-year-old Tracy Roberts was a former exotic dancer who turned to sex work to support a crack cocaine habit that worsened over time as Tracy began experimenting with drugs and alcohol as a teen. After dropping out of high school at 16, she was a frequent presence on the Atlantic City Strip. Tracy was last seen alive in November of 2006 when she was hit in the throat by a man who wanted to be her pimp, and she was hospitalized for her injuries. Tracy called her mother in Delaware from the hospital, but despite her mother leaving immediately to make the 90-minute drive, Tracy left the hospital just minutes before her mother got there, and she was murdered shortly after. Her body was discovered just 12 days after her mother made the trip to rescue her daughter.
It's rough.
Yeah, extremely rough for a mother to get that call.
Yeah.
And like most mothers, she sprang into action.
Sure.
She was going to do whatever she had to do to help out her child. I think the big question is, why didn't Tracy wait for her?
Yeah.
That's one of the questions that pops into my head. Obviously, she wanted her mother's help, or she wouldn't have called her.
So did somebody make her leave?
So I think that's a question that we have to kind of ponder as we go through. 35-year-old Kim Raffo was a former waitress who had fallen on some hard times due to her battles with addiction. Really was a downward spiral that began when she became involved in an extramarital affair with a man who was an addict. She was a Brooklyn native and former PTA mom. Kim left her husband and children, and she turned to sex work to support herself and her growing drug habit. She was last seen alive the day before the bodies were discovered and offered investigators the best evidence in finding the killer. She had no defensive wounds, which indicated to police that she was murdered while she was drugged or while she was incapacitated in some way. A friend from Ventnor who was interviewed shortly after Kim was found said that she was trying to get her life together, and now she'll never have that chance.
So this is sad. These women had addiction issues, and a few of them were making progress to get away from that, and they never got the opportunity to get to that better spot, because somebody decided to take their life.
Yeah, I agree with you. Obviously, we are giving background on each of these victims, and some of it's not flattering. I get that. And,
sure.
and that's tough when you have to kind of say some of these things about a murder victim.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to the story. I also think it's important to get across what you just said.
Yeah.
Yes, they had issues with drug addiction, and many people throughout the world do.
That's very true.
A lot of times drug addiction leads to sex work. We know that.
Right.
We've talked about it in many episodes. When you're in the throes of that addiction, it has to be fed. And, where are you going to get the money to feed that addiction? Now, having said all that, I don't want it to come out as though we're bad-mouthing these individuals.
Not at all.
They didn't deserve to be murdered, obviously.
No.
And like you said, I don't know about all, but I think a lot of them were fighting it.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people do. They fight it, and it's a tough fight when you're in that kind of vicious cycle of trying to get clean. Maybe you relapse and then you try again. It's all part of the process until you get to that right spot where you can finally beat it.
Yeah. I mean, these women were somebody's daughter, sister, mother, Yeah,
I love that. I love that you're saying that, because I think they have to be viewed that way. And you still have to talk about what they were going through, because it could be very important to the story and to finding out who murdered them.
Yeah, the MO of the killer.
Yeah. So I think, we'd be doing the audience a disservice if we didn't talk about it.
Right.
But I hate it. At the same time, I hate that we have to kind of say some of these negative things, but they are very important.
Yeah. I mean, we would love to find the background on these individuals before all this happened and tell you all the wonderful things they did. But it's just there.
It's just not reported on that way. So Gibbs, we mentioned that Kim Raffo had no defensive wounds. Now, while the other three victims were too decomposed to make a conclusive cause of death ruling, it did not appear that they sustained defensive wounds either. And again, I think that's very important. Also, a stranger's DNA was found beneath Kim's fingernails, which could have come from her killer, or, could have been from some type of incidental contact. The DNA did not match anyone in the National CODIS database. And you kind of think about, okay, you have DNA.
Right.
You're going to solve the case. And that's just not always true.
No.
We talk about so many unsolved cases where they have great DNA evidence. But if the person who that DNA belongs to is not in any of the databases, well, what does it do for you? Nothing until you get somebody who you believe is a suspect and you can try to test their DNA against it.
Yeah. Or in this case, if they found somebody that did match the DNA underneath her fingernails, but they vetted out to find out it had nothing to do with the murder at all, at that point, that DNA is no longer valid for anything.
Radio host and Guardian Angels founder Chris Silwicka, organized a team to infiltrate the criminal underbelly of Atlantic City to try to discover the identity of what the FBI was now classifying as a serial killer. He said, "We're there around the clock, patrolling for illicit activities and any information about this case."
Hey, any help out there is appreciated.
And the Guardian Angels have been around for a long time now, and they've done some great work. According to NewJersey.com, despite having 4 victims' bodies in one location, police initially refused to call the murders the work of a serial killer who was on the loose in Atlantic City. And despite a task force being assembled to work on the case, there have been no arrests made. And
craving your next action-packed adventure? Audible delivers thrills of every kind on your command, like Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, where a lone astronaut must save humanity from extinction, narrated with stunning intensity by Ray Porter. From electrifying suspense and daring quest to spine-tingling horror and romance in far-off realms, unleash your adventurous side with gripping titles that'll keep you guessing. Discover exclusive Audible originals, hotly anticipated new releases, and must-listen bestsellers that hook you from the first minute. Because Audible knows there's no greater thrill than the one that speaks to you. Discover what lies beyond the edge of your seat. Start your free 30-day trial at audible.com/WonderyUS. That's audible.com/WonderyUS.
as far as we could tell, Gibbs, there are no active suspects who are being investigated. The case appears to have stalled, but it's still in an active and open designation. The murders were featured in a segment of the show America's Most Wanted as recently as December 2019, but there has been little to report since the airing of that program. And Gibbs, getting on America's Most Wanted is huge, or any of those big shows, right, that have a large audience. Many times a large number of tips are generated, but nothing really came out of it this time. And it happens. They don't solve every case.
No.
Or they don't help solve every case, right?
Yeah, I just don't know if America's Most Wanted was drawing the same numbers as it did back in the day.
Yeah, it probably wasn't, when it was most recently aired, but it still has a pretty large audience, I'm sure. And the hope is always there, right? Whether it's being profiled on Dateline, 48 Hours, America's Most Wanted, whatever it is, you're going to reach somebody that knows something, kind of what we talked about in the beginning of the episode. It just didn't happen in this case. Jeffrey Blitz with the Atlantic City Prosecutor's Office said that the major crime squad associated with his office, along with assistance from local police and the FBI, continue to work on the case daily. And that's what you want, right? You want this to be worked on. You don't want it shelved. You don't want it to basically become a cold case file that really nobody's working on, or somebody takes a look at it every 3 months or every 6 months or whatever it is.
Yeah, exactly.
Damon Tyner, an AC prosecutor, said in a press release about the case in 2019, somebody knows something about these cases. Somebody has to know something. He said of the victims, gives something along the lines of what you said, right? They were somebody's mother, sister, daughter, and wife. Tyner also said that investigative efforts on the case continue every day. The following law enforcement agencies continue to work on the case: the Atlantic City Prosecutor's Office, the Egg Harbor Police Department, the Atlantic City Police Department, the FBI, and the New Jersey State Police. Tyner said that all agencies involved, local, county, state, federal, remain diligent in the pursuit of the person or persons responsible. So you got a lot of agencies, Gibbs, still working this case.
Yeah, a lot of hands-on.
In some capacity. I'm sure some more than others, but, I think that's a good thing. According to Fox News, one person of interest was brought to the attention of investigators by his girlfriend when they were in the midst of a domestic dispute. 41-year-old repairman Terry Olison was staying at the Golden Key Motel in exchange for doing repairs on the property. He had been a resident at the motel for about a month when authorities investigated him. When searching his room, they found cameras set up suspiciously and discovered images Olesen had taken of his girlfriend's underage daughter undressing without her knowledge or consent. So he was charged for that offense, but he voluntarily submitted DNA, which did not match the sample recovered from Kim Raffo, and he was ultimately cleared as a suspect in the murders. So, not a great guy, doing something that he shouldn't be doing.
A little creepy.
Yeah, very creepy.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's any wonder, Gibbs, that he was in the middle of a domestic dispute with his girlfriend.
Yeah, I'm sure she was not happy at all.
That he was videoing or taking pictures or both of her underage daughter while she was undressing. But police cleared him as a suspect in the murders. Now, I do want to talk about the clearing of a suspect solely based on the fact that they don't match the DNA under the victim's fingernails.
Yeah.
Because to me, I just don't know how you can do that. And maybe they had other information they used to clear, because we said it earlier. You know, the DNA under her fingernails could have been there before the murder even took place. So it could be somebody else's, not the killer's.
Right.
So I think it's tough for me to understand how you can clear someone solely based on the fact that they don't match. Now, I get it. You don't have any evidence.
Right. You can say,
because you don't have a match.
Yeah. You know, I mean, okay, so that's not his DNA underneath the fingernails. And you, like you said, you don't have anything else to tie him to that.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean he couldn't have done it.
No, and I guess it's maybe did they really clear him, or was it just because he didn't match, they just couldn't move in, they couldn't move forward with anything. Right. They had nothing to even really look at other than the fact that he did some stuff he shouldn't have done, taping this underage girl.
Right.
It's more around general cases, excluding people because they don't match. I think there's got to be other factors involved as well.
You would think.
Yeah, you would think. Maybe there is, and it just hasn't been publicized.
Yeah, that's true too.
One of the victims, Kimberly Raffo, was last known to be with a client, a doctor, in a Tropicana casino hotel room. The doctor told Fox News that Kim told him she was leaving to get drugs, but never returned. All of his subsequent calls to her cell phone went to voicemail, and they were later determined to have pinged off a cell tower on the Black Horse Pike. So this doctor was cleared of having any involvement in the deaths of any of the victims. During an interview with Christina Corbin with Fox News, a sex worker in the area told Corbin about an individual named Eldridge Raymond Burchell, who calls himself the Riverman, and claims he confessed to her to being the killer. The Riverman was the name Ted Bundy gave to the Green River Killer before he was identified as Gary Ridgway. This was when Bundy was offering his assistance to investigator Robert Keppel. Burchell was investigated, but was never officially named as a person of interest, although there is no official statement saying that he has been cleared. So, Gibbs, this guy's interesting, but we just don't have that much more information on him. We don't know if he's still a person of interest, if he was ever officially a person of interest, a suspect, if they're still actively looking at him. We just don't know.
Yeah, maybe he just wants some notoriety, calling himself the Riverman, saying that he did it.
Well, as strange as it is, there are people that do that all the time. I never understand it. Why anyone would want to associate themselves with a murder or multiple murders, that just doesn't make sense to me. You stay as far away from that as you can.
Man, don't get near that.
According to StalkInc.com, a profile of the offender was created by John Kelly, who runs a private investigation agency called Stalk. John Kelly's profile contained in part the following descriptors. This lethal predator is a local male who is very familiar with the Atlantic City area and the disposal site of the victims. He has a very organized personality, which influences his everyday activities, including his work. He is very rigid and structured in his everyday life. A place for everything, and everything in its place would be his motto. He reads books on serial killers and has come to have knowledge of crime scenes and investigations.
Well, that could be a lot of our listeners.
It could be. It could be. The first part's my wife. Rigid, structured, wants everything in its place. That is my wife to a T. Now, she doesn't have a lot of knowledge of crime scenes and investigations. And as far as I know, she's never been to Atlantic City. So I think we can rule her out.
Yeah, she's out.
She's out. But she is a very organized type person. I do want to go back to the first part. Obviously, this is a lethal predator. I think that's safe to say.
Right.
Local male, familiar with the area, and especially the disposal site of the victims. I think you'd throw the motel in there because of the proximity of where the victims were disposed.
Yeah, I mean, I think somebody had to know how that hotel sits and how it could potentially give you privacy to that drainage ditch that ran behind it.
Yeah, and I think you'd also maybe need to know a little bit about the patterns of the motel, the comings and the goings, and when it's busy and when it's not. You don't want to be seen.
No.
You don't want to be spotted disposing of bodies. So I think some local knowledge is key. I think also the other thing to look at is it's not just one body, right? You're not a tourist who chose to kill somebody and found a place to dispose of the body. You're talking about 4 people, which to me probably rules out tourist because it's a short period of time, but it's over a period of time.
Right. So that's, I mean, again, you're going to lean towards the local person.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. And I think that makes a lot of sense. Kelly went on to say that this person has an extreme foot fetish and has an extensive collection of women's shoes. So now we're in the territory of like a Jerry Brudos here.
Yeah, I mean, I understand what he's trying to say because all 4 victims were shoeless.
Yeah.
I don't know if that really means a shoe fetish, a foot fetish, or is that just the circumstances that occurred?
The shoes fell off somewhere. Yeah, I don't know. Or he took them as a trophy. I don't know. But I see where he's going.
Right.
I see the logic that he's using. I think when you talk about profiles, they're not always 100% accurate, obviously.
Oh, yeah, of course.
But I see where he's going. He's using the information that he has, and he's drawing conclusions based off that. He said that this person has not killed every sex worker that he's come into contact with. There are sex workers who know him from the sexual gratification he gets from their feet. He's non-social and likes to keep to himself. He's narcissistic and everything revolves around him. He's also concerned with making himself look good in all aspects. If criticized or disagreed with, he would become very agitated. When he wants to, he can be very charming.
Well, that's a lot right there.
And I think that goes with quite a few serial killers. And you look at somebody like Ted Bundy. That was a guy who could be unbelievably charming when he wanted to or he needed to in order to fool somebody or lure somebody.
Yeah, he was a master at that.
Into becoming his next victim. You and I, we profile a lot of serial killers and we're often talking about, okay, some of them have low IQs, but then it seems as though even some of those individuals, they're very cunning.
Yes.
And they can be charming and they can turn it on and off when they need to. So I get that. Now, the other thing about profiles is you'll see a lot of the same information in many of them. We often joke about white male between 25 and 45.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
You're going to see that in quite a few profiles because the majority of serial killers are white males between this age and that age.
You do see that narcissistic a lot too.
Yeah, absolutely. Kelly said that in his pre-offense mode, he would have talked about the sinful nature of sex work, or he may have voiced his concerns about the economic impact of sex workers destroying Atlantic City's value or reputation. In his post-offense mode, he'd say things like, they got what they deserved, or good riddance. So to me, Kelly is putting a lot of emphasis on the fact that this is an individual who is targeting sex workers because he has a disdain for them.
Yeah.
He doesn't like them, even though he frequents them on a regular basis. And there may be some sex workers out there that could recognize him from his foot fetish.
That's a good point. And I find it interesting, the other 2 episodes we did this week circled around the same type of theories of the sex workers, the dislike
or hatred
really
for women and or sex workers especially. Yeah. I'm not exactly sure where he's drawing that one from, but okay, I get it. I look at it as that's possible, but it also could be that he's targeting sex workers because he's able to lure them to a place more easily than he would be, let's say, a woman that he just saw on the street who was a tourist or whatever. That could be possible as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the sex worker could be an easier target because if they need the money, especially if they have an addiction, they're going to easily go with him versus, like you said, a tourist be like, you're going to have to grab me if you're going to take me.
Right. I'm not getting in the car with you. There's no reason for me to get into the car with you. He went on to say that he follows news of his killings in the media. And I think most killers do.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah.
I think they get off on seeing their exploits in the papers or talked about on television shows, things like that. His hobbies would include art and photography, and his obsessive fantasies would compel him to search for violent and graphic pictures in all forms of media. He probably has a prior record of violence or physical abuse or sexual harassment towards women. He may have recently suffered a setback in his work or in a personal relationship. So again, those last 2 sentences, I think you can almost insert them in the majority of profiles.
Absolutely.
Because there's a good chance this person has a prior criminal history.
Yep.
You also have a really good chance that there was some life event that possibly triggered the beginning of his murder.
Yeah. That pushed him over the edge.
Yeah. So whether that was losing a job, losing a relationship, a girlfriend, maybe a divorce, something like that, that could be a trigger that set somebody off and set them into motion to make the leap from fantasy to reality. This predator is probably detached from his father and suffered abuse himself as a child. This person has also killed before, and he will be compelled to continue his murderous ways in the future. Okay, I agree with the first sentence, absolutely. I think you see that quite a bit. Detachment,
yep.
Abuse as a child.
Yeah.
You and I cover that extensively. Now, whether the individual has killed before, I don't know. It's probably a pretty safe bet. Now, the second piece of that, I absolutely agree with.
Oh, I do too. I mean, he's got the taste for it. He's done it 4 times.
At least.
At least.
That we know of.
Got away with it.
And he did it 4 times. Why? Assuming that these individuals weren't known to him. Let's say, there was no grudge, there was no animosity specifically against these 4 individuals. He did it and continued to do it because he got something from it.
Sure he did.
And so he's going to want to get that again.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we see with serial killers. They have a hard time stopping, just like we talked about drug addiction. Okay, does a serial killer get addicted to the high, to the rush, to the sexual gratification that they get from what they're doing?
Absolutely, they do.
I think it's absolutely possible.
I mean, I know we've heard some of them say that.
Yeah, some of them have said that in some of the episodes. Yeah. Absolutely. And so therefore, if that's true, it makes it so much more likely that they're going to have to continue to do it. They're going to be compelled to.
Exactly.
Some law enforcement theorize that the killer moved on because of the police presence during the investigations. Others theorize the killer moved on because he knew the sex workers, knew someone was targeting them, and they were more aware of what was going on. So he fled the area. A smaller percentage theorized that the killer is still in the area and maybe was even in law enforcement.
I mean, I think all that is possible.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. If you committed 4 murders, at least that we know of, and then all of a sudden, okay, there is a lot of heat. There is a lot of investigators. Would you move to another part of the country? Continue to do what you're doing where there's not as much heat.
Yeah.
I think that's extremely plausible.
I think that's probably the most likely.
And then I think there's always the possibility that this person was arrested for something else completely separate from the murders. They haven't been able to put it together, right? Or this person died. People die every day.
They sure do.
Accidents. There's all kinds of reasons.
But you're right, because he could be arrested, sitting in a jail somewhere. But because even if they have his DNA, if that's not his DNA underneath her nails,
they wouldn't be able to put it together yet.
Yeah.
Eventually, the township raised funds to purchase the Golden Key Motel for over $400,000, and then they tore it down, putting an end to what many people thought of as a very dangerous motel. The former mayor, Jake Glassy, who lives in the area, described it as home to crack addicts, sex workers, and wackos.
Well, maybe that's why he's former.
I don't know if I would use the word wackos, but
I get it. It was a
place I wouldn't want to stay.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way. It was dangerous. I mean, there was a lot of illegal activity going on. In a documentary titled The Long Island Serial Killer, A Mother's Hunt for Justice, a theory was proposed which connected the Gilgo Beach serial killer in Long Island to the Eastbound Strangler in Atlantic City. And I think most people are familiar with the Long Island serial killer. This person murdered at least 10 people. The bodies were found on Gilgo and Oak Beaches in Suffolk County, New York, between 2010 and 2011. The film claims the idea that the same culprit could also have been behind the serial killings near Atlantic City, which occurred 4 years earlier. The victims shared similarities in each of these cases. In both, the killings were committed against female sex workers. The method of murder was strangulation in both of these series. But I think, however convincing the theory may be to some people, there's really no solid evidence to link the two cases together.
But I like where this leads you a little bit, because it makes sense. I mean, if he got scared because all the law enforcement and moved away from the area, and then he found himself here and picked up where he left off at, I don't know. I mean, it's plausible, right?
I think it goes back to the theory of the heat is on.
Yeah.
I'm going to move to another location, but I'm not going to stop doing what I'm doing. And so it would make sense that he would select similar victims. The MO would be very similar, which I believe it is similar in both of these cases. But as we know, there's serial killers operating all over the place. So it's not a foregone conclusion that the two would be the same person, but it could be. I mean, I think it's a theory that you have to look at, but until there's more evidence or something like that, it's just that. It's a theory. It's a possibility. I think bottom line gives, when we look at this case, regardless of the lifestyle choices or the challenges that these victims were facing, they deserve justice. They didn't deserve to die. These young women had friends, they had family who loved them, cared for them. The big problem we have in this case is there's just nothing lately that has shed any light, provided any type of real lead for investigators. So unless there's another body or a dump site, or more importantly, someone comes forward with that needed bit of information, that tip that gives investigators the path that they need, it's going to be tough.
Yeah.
Quite a bit of time has passed, so the case is not getting fresher. Now, the other possibility is that the DNA under Kim Raffo's fingernails does belong to the killer, and the killer makes a mistake and gets caught, has their DNA taken, and it ends up in the database. That could really, break the case wide open.
That's definitely a game changer if that happens.
The Atlantic City prosecutor's office is asking for the public's assistance in this case. It's offered a $25,000 reward for information leading to the arrest and prosecution of the person responsible for these murders. And this didn't happen right away. It took over a decade for the reward to be offered. So, you look at that and you think, okay, 10 years is a long time.
Yeah.
Was valuable time lost? Could someone have come forward for $25,000? Maybe.
I think so.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Hindsight's 20/20, but obviously you wish it would have been offered, way back when.
And if you're trying to protect your tourism business, I would think the big casinos there would be
$25,000 is not that much money when you view it in the grand scheme of the tourist industry in Atlantic City.
Yeah.
It's entirely possible that, others who worked the streets or lived on the streets back during that time frame know something that could help move the case forward. Unfortunately, and we see this in a lot of cases, the population, the people that we're talking about who may have information, they don't really trust law enforcement all that much.
No.
And because of that, I think they're less likely to come forward. That makes it tough. And I go back to the profile. If this person really does have a very serious foot fetish, there could be someone living today that maybe is not in the industry now, but was back then at the time of the murders, and, maybe had a regular client who really kind of exhibited some of these things that we talked about, the foot fetish, and, maybe was making some of the comments that this profiler thought this person would make.
Yeah.
And that could be, a great tip, but maybe they would come forward now. Maybe somebody would be willing to come forward now when they weren't back then because of, the type of work that they were into.
Yeah. And they come forward, and with that tip and it leads to the arrest, they're going to get some money.
Yeah. And that's what we hope happens. If you have any information about this case, please call the tip line at 609-909-7666. You can also call the FBI directly at 1-800-CALL-FBI. If you wish to remain anonymous, You can also call your local Crime Stoppers number. So tough case, Gibbs, and you know, a lot of the ones that we do are, basically they all are. When I think about this case, to me, you know, I'm really interested in this profile about some of the aspects. Some of them are general. Some of them are very specific. Again, it's based on information. It doesn't mean it's 100% accurate.
Right.
I have a feeling, and it's just a feeling, that this was a person local to the area who sometime after the murders moved away.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, okay, that's information. Somebody may know somebody that just kind of up and disappeared. And then you put some of the other pieces together with it. You know, maybe this was a person who spoke ill of sex workers.
Yeah.
And then shortly after the murders, they just up and moved.
Or had a collection of women's shoes.
I don't know. It's going to be something like that. Somebody comes forward with something that they probably don't think is important. I'm telling you, that's what solves a lot of these cases.
Or they remember that person moving to Long Island.
Yeah. Or wherever.
Yeah.
But that's it for our episode on the Atlantic City 4. We got some voicemails. You want to check those out?
Yeah, let's hear them.
Hi, this is Ginger calling again from San Jose, California. I called you guys, I think, around the same time last year. Left you a pretty lengthy voicemail. I'll keep it short and sweet this time. Just wanted to let you both know that you're still doing a spectacular job. I'm enjoying every episode. The last couple of episodes especially have been really, really fascinating, and all the details that you guys include and all the research that you do really shows. One little clarification, I just listened to the Elise Poller episode, and you keep calling San Luis Obispo. It's actually San Luis Obispo. I thought that was kind of funny. We'll probably get a lot of calls on that one. And really quick, I'm curious if Gibby really does have an Instagram page. I can't seem to find it, but if he does, I'd love to check it out. But he probably doesn't. Anyway, just wanted to let you guys know you're doing a fantastic job. Keep up the good work, and love listening to you on my commute home and on the way to work. Thanks so much. Have a great day.
Gibbs, first of all, I don't know why she's shocked that I would butcher a city name. That's kind of my thing.
Yeah.
That's kind of my thing. Second of all, you absolutely have an Instagram page.
I do. True.
Now, it's not safe for work. I'll throw that out there right now. There are quite a few pictures of the older Rex West days.
Oh, yeah. It's exciting stuff. And I know how much you really enjoy my quotes out there.
Yeah. There's a lot of inspirational quotes, and boy, I just get a real kick out of reading those every day.
Oh, they're exciting, man.
He does have an Instagram page.
Yeah, I do. It's called, actually, I'm looking it up. It's True Crime Gibby. Just type in True Crime Gibby. You'll find me.
And you had to look that up?
I couldn't remember if it was just Gibby True Crime or True Crime Gibby. I couldn't remember. So.
You're on there 800 times a day. You don't know what it's called?
Easy.
No, we appreciate it.
I'm out there.
Hey, y'all, it's Ida Mae from Texas. Mike, I got that, but I'm still Team Mike. However, you're always messing with Gibby about mispronunciation. I'm listening to the Carrie case. It's like within the first 30 y'all did. I'm pretty sure you just said pelvis. I rewinded it, listened to it. I broke my pelvic. So you might want to Google that. You messed up. I got you. Neener. Bye, y'all.
All right, I'm going back to listen. I don't know why in the world I would say pelvic. Now, unless you were talking about the pelvic area.
I don't know.
Isn't that right? Isn't that a word?
Pelvic?
Yeah. It's
pelvis?
A pelvis, but you're talking about the pelvic area. Can you say that? I don't know. Maybe not.
You're asking me, which is hilarious.
Yeah, why am I asking you?
That's hilarious, man.
I mean, I may make a mistake, but I don't know why I keep asking you to try to help me with it.
Pelvic bone.
Right, the pelvic bone.
Yeah. Is connected to the
thigh bone. Yeah. I'll have to go back and listen to it.
Hey, Mike and Gibby. This is Aaron, once again, out of Sacktown, California. First off, I just wanted to say sorry to Gibby for what he had to go through, and I'm glad to hear at least he's out of the hospital on the upward. So good to hear from you again, Gibby, on the podcast. Second of all, we want to talk about a coincidence. Sunday morning, I watched Unsolved Mysteries. I think I've seen every season, every episode, probably 5 times plus. And that particular morning, I'm watching the case of Dorothy Holden and Gilbert Cannon. And it just so happens the same night you guys put out the show on that same case, and just that whole story, the whole crime on the show, the reenactment is so realistic and so scary. It's hard to it's one of those cases where it's hard to forget what happened, and so that's something I'll never forget. And so you guys did a really good job recapping the show, and just a weird, bizarre story what he had to go through with the son, Charles Holden. So again, thanks for all you guys do, and keep your own time ticking, guys. Thank you. Bye-bye.
That is such a coincidence of, how many episodes do they have? Tons.
Oh my gosh.
That it would just air that night. Yeah.
Yeah. That's because I called the network.
Well, I'm sure.
Yeah.
You got that kind of pull.
Hey, Mike and Gibby, Mark. Just as I was saying, I just discovered this show a little late. Been binging about 12 episodes a day. I work 12-hour shifts, so keep it going. I love all the details, and you guys are awesome. You guys get me through my day. So, as you always say, keep your own time ticking. And have a good day.
Hey, man, you're never late to the show.
That's always better late than never is what I say. You say you're never late. We don't care when you get here. Just get here.
Yeah, and when you're here, stay.
And then start binging and keep binging, and then listen while you're asleep, and support the sponsors, do all that stuff, and we're golden.
That's right. So we definitely appreciate it.
Yeah, we do. And we love everyone. We appreciate what you do for us. We appreciate you listening. But that's it for another episode of True Crime All the Time Unsolved. So for Mike
and Gibby,
stay safe and keep your own time ticking.